Margarita Simonyan spoke about a serious breast illness. The editor-in-chief of Russia Today and Kremlin Aid shared her condition on the state propaganda TV channel Rossiya 1 on September 7th. According to her, the surgery will be performed on September 8th.
This week I was diagnosed with a terrible, serious illness. Tomorrow I have surgery right here under this medal. I still came...
Simonyan also recalled her husband's illness. The TV propagandist director Tigran Keosayan.
As you probably know, my husband Tigran Keosayan has been in a coma in the hospital for 9 months now. As we say in Russia, when trouble comes, it opens the gates wide. The gates in our house aren't just left unlocked anymore. They've practically been blown off by the winds of fate, if you ask me.
Margarita Simonyan is the editor-in-chief of one of the largest state media holdings, Rossiya Segodnya, which includes the RIA Novosti agency. She also heads the TV channel Russia Today, one of the main propaganda media outlets targeting audiences abroad. It became known on January 8, 2025, that Russian propagandist Tigran Keosayan had experienced clinical death and fallen into a coma. He had long-standing heart problems, but Margarita Simonyan did not disclose the exact cause of her husband's condition. At that time, she wrote,
I didn't want to say anything until the very last moment, but since reporters have already started calling, I'm writing myself. My husband, Tigran Keosayan, has experienced clinical death and is in a coma. As many people know, he has had a very sick heart for a very long time.
The scandalously notorious Kremlin propagandist and Russian TV show host Tigran Keosayan promoted Russophile and chauvinistic narratives against Ukraine. He was actively engaged in propaganda justifying the aggression against Ukraine and the war crimes committed by the occupying forces. Mass protests against the country's authorities have begun in Istanbul. This was reported by the publication Hurriyet. According to journalists, the protesters are opposing the decision to remove the leadership of the opposition Republican People's Party branch, one of whose leaders, former Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu, has been under arrest since May. Clashes broke out between the demonstrators and the police. The city is calling for pot-banging protests. Demonstrators are marching through the streets and banging on pots as a sign of protest against the authorities' actions. The decision to remove the leadership of the Istanbul branch of the party was made by the Istanbul Civil Court of First Instance. It annulled the results of the 2023 Congress, at which the office's leadership was elected. In addition, the Istanbul Governor's Office has announced a 3-day ban on gatherings, demonstrations, press statements, and the distribution of leaflets in several districts of the city. The ban will last until September 10th and applies to the central districts of the capital. Let us recall that Ekrem İmamoğlu is considered Erdogan's main rival in the 2028 elections, which is why his case in Turkey is seen as a politically motivated attempt to eliminate a competitor. He was detained on March 19, 2025. This also sparked a wave of mass protests in Turkey. At that time, more than 2 million people took to the streets to protest the arrest of the mayor of Istanbul. The Turkish opposition began collecting signatures for early presidential elections. A few days later, the politician was removed from his position as mayor of Istanbul and accused of bribery. In July, he was sentenced to 1 year and 8 months in prison. The war economy continues to take its toll on Russia. The country is preparing for budget cuts. This is reported by the Financial Times. Oil and gas revenues have fallen by 20% since the beginning of the year, GDP growth has slowed by almost half, and the budget deficit has reached 4,900 billion rubles. The Ministry of Finance is already discussing cuts to non-military spending, infrastructure, subsidies for clubs and sanatoriums. Economists believe that the gaps will be filled through new borrowing and partially from the reserve fund, half of which has already been spent on the war. Experts note that for the first time, the Kremlin is facing the need for real trade-offs in the budget. They will have to choose between military spending and social programs. At the same time, the risk of recession is becoming more likely. Russian regions have also faced a fuel shortage. 95-octane gasoline has started to disappear from gas stations, even in Moscow. The same situation is happening in Saratov. Residents complain that they are forced to buy lower-quality 92-octane gasoline. One of the city's gas station chains was forced to admit that there is no gasoline in the city and there won't be any. According to media reports, fuel has virtually disappeared from gas stations in Zabaikalsky Krai, Primorye, and the Russian-occupied territories of Crimea and Luhansk. As reported by the Telegram channel Kremlin Snuffbox, the Russian government was unpleasantly surprised by the reaction to the publication about the possible introduction of food ration cards for certain categories of Russians due to rising prices. According to one of the channel's sources, a food shortage in Russia is allegedly not expected, but he supports ration cards as a way to protect a significant portion of fellow citizens from problems and to give them constant access to basic foodstuffs. Meanwhile, the European Union may introduce new sanctions against Russian banks and energy companies. This may be done as part of the latest round of measures aimed at putting pressure on the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin to end the war against Ukraine. This was reported by Bloomberg, citing people familiar with the matter. US President Donald Trump responded to the massive shelling of Kyiv by the aggressor country, which Russia carried out on September 7th. As CNN writes, the American leader stated that he is not pleased with the situation in Ukraine. According to him,
"I'm not happy about what's happening there. I believe we will resolve this."
Trump stated that in the next few days he will have a conversation with the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. In addition, the American leader is ready to move on to the second stage of imposing sanctions against Russia. In response to journalists' questions about whether the White House is ready to impose sanctions against the Kremlin and punish Putin for the massive strikes on Ukraine, Trump answered in the affirmative. He also added that at the beginning of the week, some European leaders will visit the White House, with whom he will discuss Russia's war against Ukraine. According to Sky News, in response to Trump's statement about being ready to strengthen sanctions, the Kremlin said that Europe and Ukraine are doing everything possible to draw the US into their orbit. According to the publication, they also added that no sanctions will ever be able to force Russia to change its position. It should be noted that despite the efforts of Donald Trump and European leaders to achieve peace, Russia continues to ignore the peace process, intensifying its shelling of Ukrainian cities. On the night of September 7th, Russia carried out another massive strike on Ukraine, using more than 800 attack drones and missiles. In particular, as a result of the attack, a 9-story residential building in the Sviatoshinsky district of the capital was partially destroyed from the 4th to the 8th floors. 3 people were killed there. Among them were a mother and her 2-month-old son. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky emphasized that Russia continues to kill when real diplomacy could have started long ago, committing a deliberate crime and prolonging the war. Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrsky, stated that Ukrainian forces are achieving successes in several areas of the front. On his Facebook page, he reported that in the Pokrovsk and Dobropilya directions, a significant portion of territory has been deoccupied. According to him, the Pokrovsk direction remains one of the most difficult.
Over the past week, our units have repelled about 350 enemy attacks. It is here that the Russians have concentrated their main efforts and created the largest assault grouping, attempting to break through our defenses.
Syrsky noted that despite this, the Defense Forces units managed to regain control over 26 square kilometers of territory, having lost 5 square kilometers in August. The situation is similar in the Dobropilya direction. In addition, according to the Deep State Project, the Ukrainian armed forces have cleared the settlement of Vladimirovka in Donetsk region of occupiers and have also pushed the enemy back in the areas of the villages of Razina, Zolotoy Kolodets and Novotoretskoye. The commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces, Oleksandr Syrsky, also summed up the results of August. According to him, for the occupiers, this month was one of the months with the least territorial gains in recent times. At the same time, Ukraine's defense forces have their own successes. Overall, in August, control was restored over 58 square kilometers of land, and a number of settlements were liberated. The commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces added that during the month, Ukrainian deep strike assets struck 60 targets on Russian territory, as a result of which the aggressor country's ability to produce fuel and lubricants for the army, missiles and drones, as well as air defense systems, was weakened. The founder of the world's largest private military company, Blackwater, Eric Prince, is seeking opportunities to acquire Ukrainian companies involved in drone production. According to The Guardian, citing sources, Prince has been promoting himself in Ukraine's drone sector and seeking meetings with representatives of leading companies in this field. As a source told the publication,
Eric is entering the market to buy companies that manufacture drones.
The publication notes that Prince has been interested in Ukraine for a long time. Back in 2020, he proposed a multi-billion-dollar plan to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, involving the use of his private army to resolve the frozen conflict in Donbas. But at that time, the deal did not go through. Now the interest of the founder of the world's largest private military company coincides with attempts by US President Donald Trump to act as a mediator in brokering a peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia. It is known that the Blackwater PMC was actively operating in Iraq and Afghanistan, carrying out missions for the CIA, the State Department, and the Pentagon. However, after the incident in 2007 in Baghdad, when PMC fighters killed civilians, the company's reputation suffered a serious blow. Meanwhile, in Russia, panic had already begun over Eric Prince's interest in Ukrainian drone manufacturing companies. Some propaganda media outlets started writing that Ukraine might supposedly get its own mercenary army.
Russians may have their Schengen visas revoked. Tourists from Russia have flooded the resorts of France, Italy, and Greece, so European countries have decided to deprive Russians of their favorite vacations, according to the Italian press. Thus, the European Commission is preparing the 19th package of sanctions, which is expected to include a complete ban on issuing tourist visas to Russian citizens. A decision is expected as early as September 12th. Russians are also not welcome in Turkey. After Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, attitudes toward Russians sharply deteriorated. Hotels have even introduced an option for guests to stay in hotels where there are no Russians. Russians are also being evicted from hotels and deported from the country more and more frequently. Turkish hoteliers are particularly struck by incidents of theft involving Russians. They take everything from disposable slippers to food products from hotels, writes the UnderEmpire project. In Azerbaijan, citizens of the aggressor country complained en masse about document checks, unknown persons, and violence. At the same time, Poland will completely close its border with Belarus due to military exercises West 2025. This was stated by Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk. Tusk said that the aggressive Russian-Belarusian exercises West will begin on Friday, September 12th. On Thursday evening, we will close the borders with Belarus, including railway crossings, announced the Polish Prime Minister. The commander of the Lithuanian army, Raimundas Vaikšnoras, stated that as the joint Russian-Belarusian exercises West 2025 approach, about 40,000 military personnel will be concentrated in the Baltic countries and Poland. Lithuania has even imposed restrictions on the use of part of its airspace ahead of the exercises, West 2025. In temporarily occupied Crimea, scouts set fire to valuable Russian air defense assets. A JUR Special Forces unit struck the RLM-M radar module, part of the Nebo-M complex, right while it was on the move. According to the main intelligence directorate of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, this happened on the eve of the scouts' professional holiday.
The skilled operators of unmanned systems control crews from the Department of Active Operations of the GUR Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. On the eve of Military Day, Ukrainian intelligence delivered precise strikes on two expensive air defense system assets belonging to the Russian occupiers in temporarily occupied Crimea.
In particular, a podlet radar station and a meter-band radar module from the advanced Nebo-M complex were successfully hit and neutralized. Also, on the morning of September 9th, an air raid alert sounded in temporarily occupied Crimea. In Sevastopol, public transport was halted, and local social media channels reported alleged launches of Storm Shadow missiles. Traffic on the Kerch Bridge was also stopped. Meanwhile, the velvet season on the peninsula has been ruined. Because of the oil slick, tourists are leaving Crimea or cancelling their reservations. The area of the oil slick approaching Crimea reaches 350 square kilometers. According to reports, the slick formed during the loading of petroleum products onto a Turkish tanker in Novorossiysk. This took place right in the sea from a pipeline owned by the Caspian Pipeline Consortium. A hose burst, causing 10 tons of oil to spill into the sea. As a result, an oil slick formed, stretching from Novorossiysk along the coast of Anapa. It is now very closely approaching the Kerch Strait. Ukrainian defenders blew up enemy crossings into Russia, complicating logistics. This was reported by the 58th Separate Motorized Infantry Brigade. This was achieved thanks to the coordinated and skillful actions of the 2nd Motorized Infantry Battalion, the Battalion of Unmanned Systems, and the Reconnaissance Unit. The bridges were used by the enemy to transport ammunition and troops. After their destruction, the enemy was left with fewer roads, making it easier for our fighters to keep them under fire control.
Reconnaissance detected unusual enemy activity near one of the bridges. This bridge was actively used by the occupiers to supply their troops. To check, they flew in with an FPV drone equipped with fiber optics. They saw mines and struck the target. After that, they decided to check another bridge as well. There too, they discovered the bridge was mined and blew it up.
Also, in Penza, Russia, a main oil pipeline system has been put out of operation. Two main gas pipeline pipes with a throughput capacity of 2 million barrels per day have ceased to function. This was reported by a Union source in the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. At least 4 explosions occurred on September 8th in the railway district of the city of Penza. In addition, according to the source in Ukrainian intelligence, 2 more regional gas pipeline pipes were damaged at the same location. This concerns the main Kuybyshev-Lysychansk oil pipeline, which was also blown up on the same day in Russia's Saratov region. According to the source, the affected facility has a capacity of 82 million tons per year. In addition, the Kremlin indirectly confirmed that during the overnight drone attack on September 9th, Putin was in the Sochi area. Vladimir Putin's schedule did not change after the overnight drone attack on Sochi, his press secretary Dmitry Peskov told the TASS agency. On September 8th, Putin participated via video link in an extraordinary meeting from Sochi. The BRICS aircraft, an Il-96-300PU of the Rossiya Special Flight Detachment with the tail number RA96024, which arrived in Sochi the day before, is still at the city's airport according to this flight radar. It was on this very plane that Putin flew to Alaska for a meeting with Donald Trump.
On the evening of September 8th, according to Telegram channels, Ukrainian drones attacked temporarily occupied territories as well as Russian regions. In particular, there are reports of a large number of strikes in occupied Donetsk. According to public sources, the former Tapas plant was hit there, a site that the Russians have repeatedly used as a base for military equipment and personnel. Footage of the strikes and explosions is being posted online. According to the Ukrainian channel Dnipro Osint, not only was the former Tapas plant attacked in occupied Donetsk, but also the command post of the 41st Combined Arms Army on the grounds of the Research Institute of Integrated Automation, as well as the command post of the 20th Guards Motor Rifle Division on the territory of the Donetsk metallurgical plant. As reported by the Telegram channel Astra, the occupation head of the so-called DPR collaborator Denis Pushilin stated that, as a result of the attack, 2 people were killed and 16 were wounded. Meanwhile, the commander of the Ukrainian Armed Forces drone systems with the call sign Madyar stated that on the night of September 7th, an oil pumping station called Vtorovo in the Vladimir region of the aggressor country was hit. Soon after, satellite images appeared confirming that during the attack on Vtorovo, at least 2 enemy fuel tanks were struck. And on the night of September 9th, drones attacked the Russian city of Sochi. There, an air raid siren went off and later explosions were heard. As usual, the Russian Ministry of Defense reported that supposedly 31 drones were shot down overnight. 15 unmanned aerial vehicles were detected over the Black Sea, 7 more over the Belgorod region, 3 additional drones over the Kursk region, and 2 each over the temporarily occupied territory of Crimea and Krasnodar Krai, and 1 more each in the Tambov and Voronezh regions of Russia. Russian propagandist Margarita Simonyan underwent surgery. She shared this on her Telegram channel. According to her, she came out of anesthesia and is doing fine. Earlier, on propagandist Vladimir Solovyov's broadcast, Margarita Simonyan said that doctors had diagnosed her with a serious illness. She did not specify her diagnosis but hinted at a mastectomy. This week I was diagnosed with a terrible serious illness. I have surgery scheduled for tomorrow, right here, just under this medal. According to the Moscow Times, the head of the propaganda outlet Russia Today, Margarita Simonyan, may leave her position due to cancer. The publication's sources report that she has very serious health problems. Currently, the question of her continuing to work at Russia Today is being decided, and the possibility of her resignation is being considered. As is well known, the media holding Rossiya Segodnya, which includes the RIA Novosti agency as well as the Russia Today TV channel, is one of the Kremlin's key propaganda tools. Both Margarita Simonyan and the Rossiya Segodnya media group have been sanctioned by the US and the European Union. Simonyan herself says that in her home, This is not the first misfortune. According to the propagandist, her husband, TV host Tigran Keosayan, has been in a coma in the hospital for 9 months after clinical death. Earlier, Simonyan claimed that because of her husband's serious illness, she allegedly planned to go to the so-called special military operation, as Russian propagandists refer to Russia's war against Ukraine. Soon after, she stated that she gave up on this idea for the sake of her children. Russian dictator Vladimir Putin may have been in Sochi during the drone attack on the sea on the night of September 9th. According to Telegram channels, on September 8th it was from Sochi that he participated via video link in the BRICS meeting. According to Flight Radar 24, a few hours before that, an Il-96 300PU aircraft arrived in Sochi. It was on this plane that the Russian dictator flew to Alaska to meet with US President Donald Trump. According to Flight Radar 24, the presidential aircraft is still in Sochi. During the night, air raid sirens sounded 3 times in the city, and the airport was closed due to drone attacks. According to the Russian Ministry of Defense, 2 drones were allegedly shot down over Krasnodar Krai and another 15 over the Black Sea. As is known, Putin's residence is located in Sochi, Bocharov Ruchey. The Kremlin's powerful ruler used to enjoy vacationing there, but lately, due to recent drone attacks, he has almost entirely stopped visiting the city. In May of this year, Russian propaganda channels reported that the helicopter of Russian dictator Vladimir Putin was allegedly attacked by drones. At that time, the commander of the Russian Air Defense Division, Yuri Dashkin, claimed that during the attack, Putin was on a visit to the Kursk region. Soon after, the Moscow Times, citing sources, wrote that Putin was not under attack and that the statement from the Ministry of Defense was a carefully staged performance. According to the publication's sources, the story was spun in the media to convince Russians that the president is not hiding behind others, but supposedly takes risks and makes sacrifices.
Poland shot down Russian Shahed drones over its territory for the first time. On the night of September 10th, about 10 Russian attack drones crossed the Ukrainian border and entered Polish airspace. The Polish Air Force Operational Command reported that aviation was deployed to secure Polish airspace, and ground-based air defense and electronic recognition systems were put on high alert. Moreover, data from the Flight Radar 24 service indicated that an F-35 fighter jet was also present in Polish airspace. A Saab 340 aircraft was also scrambled there. Due to the threat of Russian drones, the airspace over 4 airports in Poland was closed. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk confirmed that the military shot down objects that violated the country's airspace during the night. Later, Tusk reported that he had informed NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte about the nighttime attack on Poland.
I informed the NATO Secretary General about the current situation and the actions we have taken against the objects that violated our airspace. We are in constant contact.
U.S. Representative Joe Wilson responded to Russia's air attack on Poland and stated that he is calling on U.S. President Donald Trump to arm Ukraine with weapons capable of striking the Russian Federation. He emphasized that Russia is attacking a NATO ally, Poland, with Iranian Shahed drones less than a week after President Trump hosted President Navrotsky at the White House.
I urge President Trump to respond with mandatory sanctions that will bankrupt the Russian war machine and to arm Ukraine with weapons capable of striking Russia. Putin is no longer satisfied with just defeat in Ukraine and bombing mothers and infants. Now he is directly testing our resolve on NATO territory.
Meanwhile, several Polish voivodeships have announced an accelerated call-up of reservists to the territorial defense forces. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk confirmed that it was indeed Russian drones that entered Polish territory on the night of September 10th. The operational command of the Polish Air Force also confirmed that these were UAVs from the Russian Federation. In a statement on social network X, the Polish Air Force Command said that this was an act of aggression that poses a direct threat to the country's citizens.
As a result of today's attack by the Russian Federation on Ukrainian territory, there was an unprecedented violation of Polish airspace by drone-type objects. This is an act of aggression that poses a real threat to the safety of our citizens.
Poland is a NATO member. Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty stipulates that an attack on one NATO member is considered an attack on NATO as a whole and triggers a response from all alliance members. The so-called principle of collective defense is the foundation of NATO's very existence. It is assumed that a member of the alliance that has been subjected to an armed attack can count on assistance from all the others. Poland's Minister of Defense also reported on social network X that more than a dozen Russian drones violated Polish airspace.
Polish and Allied radar systems tracked several objects that violated the airspace. Confronted with those that could pose a threat, the operational commander of the armed forces made the decision to neutralize them.
According to the minister, the drones that could have posed a threat were shot down. Currently, the search and identification of possible crash sites of the downed object's components is ongoing. According to media reports, a Russian drone hit a residential building in eastern Poland, damaging the roof and a vehicle on the property. US President Donald Trump refused to comment on reports of Russian drones over Poland. A source from Reuters states that NATO does not consider the incursion of drones into Poland to be an attack. President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that Ukraine is ready to help Poland build a reliable warning and defense system against such Russian threats. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte delivered a message to Russian dictator Vladimir Putin after Russian drones violated Polish airspace. As reported by Reuters, according to Rutte, this incident was absolutely reckless. The Secretary General of the alliance emphasized that a full assessment of the incident is ongoing. He addressed the Kremlin leader.
My message to Putin is clear. Stop the war in Ukraine, stop violating the airspace of our allies, and know that we are ready, we are vigilant, and we will defend every inch of NATO territory.
Meanwhile, Polish government spokesperson Adam Szlapka stated on Polsat News that NATO has invoked Article 4 of the North Atlantic Treaty in response to the Russian drone attack on Polish territory. According to him, consultations under this procedure have already taken place. According to Article 4, member states of the alliance may hold joint consultations when there is a threat to the territorial integrity, political independence, or security of any of the member countries. As political commentator Alexander Nutevsky notes on his Telegram channel back in 2015, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan demonstrated how one should respond to violations of airspace. At that time, Ankara shot down a Russian Su-24 military aircraft on the Turkish-Syrian border and also eliminated the Russian pilot. It should be noted that the Turkish leader has repeatedly stated that he supports the territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence of Ukraine. He has also emphasized that Crimea occupied by Russia should be returned to Ukraine. The president of Turkey held a phone conversation with the Emir of Qatar discussing the Israeli army's strike on Doha. This was reported by the Anadolu agency. During the conversation, Erdogan stated that Ankara supports the people of Qatar. He also condemned the attack, saying that it was aimed at deepening the regional conflict and was a clear violation of Qatar's sovereignty. Both leaders reaffirmed their commitment to continue working together to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza. The Communications Directorate of the Turkish Presidential Administration reported that joint measures to be taken in response to the Israeli attack were also discussed. Qatar had earlier stated that it would prepare a response and had already contacted friendly states regarding this matter. On September 9th, Israeli forces carried out a strike on Doha, the capital of Qatar. Several explosions were heard. Soon smoke rose over the city. A statement from the Israel Defense Forces says that a targeted strike was carried out against the top leadership of the terrorist organization Hamas. Al-Hadas claims that the operation, called Peak of Fire, was personally given the green light by US President Donald Trump. At the time of the Israeli strike, the building housed the leader of Hamas in Gaza, the head of the group's overseas office, as well as 3 members of the Hamas Politburo. A Hamas source told Al Jazeera that the Israeli airstrike targeted officials of the group who had gathered in Doha to discuss Trump's ceasefire proposal for the Gaza Strip. It is reported that the exiled Hamas leadership has long been based in Qatar, which for several years, even before the current war in the Gaza Strip, has acted as a mediator in negotiations between Hamas and Israel. US President Donald Trump stated that the decision to strike the Hamas group on Qatari territory was not made by him, but by the Prime Minister of Israel. At the same time, he noted that the goal of this attack was a worthy one. The US President added that after the attack he spoke with the Prime Minister of Israel, who told him that he wants to achieve peace. B-52 strategic bombers are heading from a US base toward Europe. This was reported by the Telegram channel Real War. At the same time, it is unknown whether this is connected to the incursion of Russian UAVs into Polish airspace. After the overnight attack, 7 drones and debris from a missile of unknown origin have already been found on Polish territory. According to Gazeta Wyborcza, this was reported by the official representative of the Polish Ministry of Internal Affairs, Karolina Galika. Earlier, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk stated that 19 Russian drones entered the country's airspace overnight, most of them from Belarus. Meanwhile, Warsaw Chopin Airport, CTX, has warned of flight delays. It is noted that this is due to the suspension of operations at 4 Polish airports on the night of September 10th. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that, according to a report from the commander of the Air Force of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Ukrainian military personnel had already informed the Polish side about the movement of Russian drones during the night. In his Telegram channel, the head of state wrote that around 1 o'clock at night Kiev time, the first crossing of the state border between Ukraine and Poland by a Russian UAV was recorded.
In total, at least several dozen Russian drones were moving along the border of Ukraine and Belarus and in the western regions of Ukraine, approaching targets on the territory of Ukraine and apparently Poland.
At the same time, the Kremlin refused to comment on the incursion of Russian drones into Polish airspace. This was stated by the press secretary of the Russian dictator, Dmitry Peskov.
We would prefer not to comment on this in any way. This is not within our competence, and it is the prerogative of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation.
Peskov tried to justify himself by saying that the leadership of the EU and NATO allegedly accuse Russia of provocation on a daily basis and supposedly most often without any argumentation. And the acting chargé d'affaires of Russia in Poland, Andrzej Ordash, who was summoned to the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs after the incident, found nothing better to do than to call Poland's statements groundless and claimed that there was allegedly no evidence that these were Russian drones. On September 10th, a massive fire is raging in the Moscow region. According to Telegram channels, the Kotwar warehouse complex is on fire in the village of Nekrasovsky, Dmitrovsky urban district. The fire has engulfed 15,000 square meters. The tall column of black smoke could be seen even in Moscow. According to the Russian Ministry of Emergency Situations, the fire started around noon. Finished plastic products caught fire in the warehouse. 2 Mi-8 helicopters were brought in to help extinguish the fire. According to the Telegram channel Ostorozhno Moskva, the massive fire at the warehouse in Nekrasovka led to the suspension of the Russian dressage championship. It is noted that the horses were evacuated. Soon after, the Russian Ministry of Emergency Situations reported that the fire had been contained to 12,000 square meters. As stated by the agency,
24 pieces of equipment and 75 personnel were involved in extinguishing the fire. Aviation from the Russian Ministry of Emergency Situations was also deployed. Preliminary reports indicate there are no casualties. At 3 o'clock, the fire was contained.
It should be noted that in Russia, enterprises connected to the military-industrial complex of the aggressor country often catch fire. For example, on September 7th, the Ilsky oil refinery in the Krasnodar region was attacked. It was reported that one of the processing units caught fire. In addition, on September 7th, the Vtorova oil pumping station in the Vladimir region of the aggressor country was hit. This was announced by the commander of the UAV forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine with the call sign Madyar. Soon, satellite images appeared confirming that at least 2 enemy fuel tanks were hit during the attack on Vtorova.
In the United States, well-known activist and ally of American President Donald Trump, Charlie Kirk, was killed. On September 10th, he was shot during a speech at Utah Valley University. Judging by footage from the scene, the shooter hit him in the neck. Initially, Kirk was hospitalized in critical condition, but they were unable to save him. American leader Donald Trump announced the activist's death on his social network.
The great, even legendary Charlie Kirk has died. No one in the United States of America understood and felt the hearts of young people better than Charlie. He was loved and respected by everyone, especially by me. And now he is no longer with us.
It is known that the shooter fired from a distance of more than 180 meters. A few hours after the shooting, the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Kash Patel, announced the arrest of a suspect in the murder of Charlie Kirk. However, he soon noted that the detainee was released after being questioned by law enforcement. Patel added that the investigation into the murder is ongoing. According to him, the police only have footage from surveillance cameras.
We have this footage, and we are analyzing it. But these are surveillance camera recordings, so you can imagine what the quality is like.
Charlie Kirk was a well-known podcast host in the US, a conservative activist, and a supporter of Donald Trump. Kirk's speeches sparked protests and petitions from student groups criticizing his views. Kirk also spread pro-Russian narratives regarding Russia's war against Ukraine. In particular, he was opposed to providing military aid to Kyiv. In addition, as CNN reports, on September 10th there was a shooting at a school in the state of Colorado. 3 people are in critical condition. In Poland, 16 drones have already been discovered after Russian drones violated the country's airspace on the night of September 10th. According to RMF24, one of them crashed into a Polish military base near Warsaw. The drone was found at a facility belonging to the Territorial Defense Forces in the town of Nowe Miasto nad Piliką in the Masovian voivodeship. The publication Bild wrote that during the attack, NATO spent at least €1,200,000 to shoot down cheap UAVs. The article notes that F-35 fighter jets and AIM-9 missiles, each costing about €400,000, were used to shoot down the drones, and 3 such missiles were used. At the same time, the cost of a single Russian drone is just a few thousand euros. The publication notes that NATO could learn from Ukraine, which shoots down drones with mobile fire teams and has special equipment for detecting them. Against the backdrop of the Russian attack, Sweden urgently sent additional aircraft and air defense systems to Poland. This was reported by Poland's Minister of National Defense, Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz. He added that the Netherlands is supplying Poland with Patriot and NASAMS multi-layered defense systems. Meanwhile, Poland has imposed flight restrictions along the border with Ukraine and Belarus until December 9th. In this zone, a complete flight ban is in effect except for military aircraft. Following Poland, Latvia is closing its airspace on the border with Russia and Belarus at least until September 18th. As the country's defense minister Andris Sprod stated at a press conference, the reason for this is Russian drones in NATO airspace. He noted that this is an alarming signal and that it is now important to do everything possible to prevent an escalation of drone attacks.
The U.S. President's Special Representative for Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, arrived in Kyiv on September 11th. It is not yet known how many days he will stay in Ukraine. Kellogg's visit comes amid intensified Russian strikes on Ukrainian regions, particularly the capital. The day before, the media reported that the fall of Russian drones on Polish territory caught Keith Kellogg while he was en route. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, at a briefing with the President of Finland, stated that the Russian drone attack on Poland and the deployment of so-called little green men in Crimea are psychologically similar.
In my opinion, the scariest thing
is that this attack is similar to Crimea, psychologically. How is it different? It's just that now it's a technological war. Now you don't just need people in green uniforms, the little green men as they were called, who simply entered your territory. Today it's a different kind of war. And today, that same role on Polish territory was carried out by Russian-made drones.
Volodymyr Zelensky expressed the opinion that with the attack on Poland, Russia wanted to see how the world would react.
To me, this is very similar to Crimea.
To me, this is very much like Crimea. And I think it's like a kind of rehearsal. And that's why I'm sharing what I think. Because Putin's messages are out there in the media, they're open, they've always been about certain parts of Poland that the Soviet Union once gave to Poland. In other words, the rhetoric is the same.
The president also noted that Russia could have struck Poland to prevent partners from providing Ukraine with their air defense systems ahead of the coming winter.
In
my view, they could also have done this so that partners wouldn't transfer air defense systems to Ukraine before winter. Because by demonstrating, we can attack you, you also need them. That sounds just like Putin.
The president of Finland stated that in 1,000 days, the Russians have advanced in Ukraine by less than 1%, paying an unimaginable price for it. In his opinion, the Russian Federation wants to escalate the war, not reach a peaceful settlement. And his recent actions toward Ukraine speak to this. Meanwhile, it has become known that Sweden will provide Ukraine with its 20th aid package, amounting to $836 million.
Special forces from the main intelligence directorate struck a Russian Black Sea Fleet ship near Novorossiysk with a drone. On September 10th in the Black Sea, special forces tracked and successfully attacked a high-value military target.
The ship in question was commissioned by the Russians in 2015. Its cost is about $60 million. The aggressor has a total of 4 such vessels.
At the time of the attack, the ship was conducting electronic reconnaissance and patrolling the approaches to the port of Novorossiysk, where part of the Russian Federation's Black Sea Fleet is currently stationed, including carriers of caliber sea-launched cruise missiles. As noted by the main intelligence directorate, repairing the Russian Federation's ship will be extremely expensive. Defense Express reports the widely circulated footage shows that its electronic equipment was hit. Despite its official designation as a multi-purpose rescue vessel, the occupiers used it as a reconnaissance ship. In Russia, such vessels have been additionally equipped and disguised with the word rescue painted on them.
Such disguising of a military vessel as a rescue ship is a violation of the rules and customs of war. That is, of course, if such things still matter or require explanation against the backdrop of the Russians' systematic daily targeted killing of civilians. Colonel, retired, of the Ukrainian Armed Forces and instructor pilot Roman Svitan stated on NV Radio, this Special Forces strike by the main intelligence directorate marks a new stage in carrying out combat missions in the Black Sea. Svitan added that the unmanned boat was at such a distance from the target that neither the Coast Guard nor Russian ships could see it. The FPV could cover a distance of 7 to 8 kilometers to complete its combat mission.
For the first time since February 2025, the ruble to euro exchange rate set a new record, reaching 100 rubles. Back on September 10th, the Central Bank of Russia set the euro exchange rate at 99 rubles and 82 kopecks. Subsequently, the European currency rose in price by almost 2 rubles at once. It is known that the Russian currency began to weaken back at the end of August. It was at that time that the dollar's value on the exchange was within 80 rubles. The head of Sberbank, Herman Gref, predicted a significant weakening of the ruble by the end of this year. Analysts believe that the Russian currency will continue to fall due to a number of factors. The market expects the continuation of the monetary policy easing course adopted by the leadership of the Central Bank of Russia at the beginning of the summer, and the ruble is also affected by the lowering of the key interest rate. One should not discount the impact of expectations regarding a possible decision to abolish the mandatory foreign currency revenue requirement for Russian exporters. Economic observer Vyacheslav Shiryaev stated that the economy of the Russian Federation continues to plunge into the abyss. In his opinion, it is necessary to let the ruble float freely, balance exports and imports, and give domestic producers some breathing room.
If the ruble shoots up to 120, what happens to prices? They start to rise by about 1.5 times. But if the exchange rate increases by, say, 40 rubles, then, for example, prices will follow suit by 50%, let's say. But you don't have to do that. You can keep the ruble strong and, well, stimulate import growth. And as a result, at some point, your local industry gets destroyed.
Economist Ladjukovsky states there is already a crisis in the Russian Federation. So far, the central bank and Rosstat have not confirmed this. Apparently, they don't want to be recognized as underground counter-revolutionaries, says the economist.
The fact is that the Russian economy has been declining throughout all of 2024, and the civilian sectors have been falling since the end of 2023 and all through 2024. I have provided my own estimates on this, and according to my calculations and models, the economy has already been in decline for more than 21 months. There is a recession in everything not related to the military-industrial complex. There is a decline. And the official figures show this as well. The economic growth rate has dropped almost to zero. That's it. We've hit the wall.
Meanwhile, the Bank of Russia continues to refrain from publishing a forecast for the ruble exchange rate in the medium term.
Russian singer Alla Pugacheva gave her first major interview since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. It was published on the YouTube channel of Russian journalist Katerina Gordeva. Pugacheva made a number of statements about Russia's war against Ukraine, as well as about the Russian authorities. In particular, she said,
"I won't go into detail now, but it's a horror. Everyone knows that I am against the war. And I believe that our country has suffered greatly. Secondly, to be honest, but first of all, of course, I feel sorry."
The singer also spoke about the fact that Russia cannot accept Ukraine's independence. She noted, and I quote, "Some people don't want to live in a communal apartment. They want their own place." Pugacheva added that it is possible and necessary to criticize a state that is waging war. At the same time, according to her, neither she nor her husband, Maxim Galkin, could remain silent about the war.
There is such a thing as conscience. And conscience, Katya, is more valuable than fame, more valuable than luxury, more valuable than anything.
Pugacheva also spoke about her attitude toward the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. She noted that she used to have a good opinion of him, but soon became disillusioned. The singer recalled that she was disappointed by Putin's behavior when the Kursk submarine sank. Pugacheva noted that after some of the president's statements, she no longer has any doubts about her choice.
And suddenly I hear the president say, "We need people, the kind of person who is well-fed, drunk, and has his nose in tobacco or even cocaine. But it's harder with smart people. They can influence opinions. We don't need people like that." And then a weight fell from my heart.
Pugacheva also said that when Putin presented her with the Order of Merit for the Fatherland in 2014, she had to wait for him for 3 hours. That's when she realized that he was not the person he wanted to appear to be.
Residents of the Leningrad region and St. Petersburg couldn't sleep on the night of September 12th due to explosions and reported one of the most massive attacks on the region since the start of the full-scale war of the Russian Federation against Ukraine. In photos published online, smoke can be seen rising above the Primorsk port area. According to the governor of the Leningrad region, Alexander Drozdenko, drones struck the oil port of Primorsk. One of the ships caught fire.
The open fire on the vessel at the Primorsk port has been extinguished. There is no threat of flooding or oil product spills.
The governor added that a fire at a pumping station in Primorsk was also extinguished. There was unrest in other regions of the Russian Federation as well. The cover plan was implemented at the airports of Pulkovo, Yaroslavl, Kaluga, Ivanovo and Pskov. There is chaos at Pulkovo airport. About 30 flights are already delayed and 13 have been cancelled. Residents of Smolensk are also reporting explosions. According to preliminary information, a strike was carried out on the Lukoil oil depot there. Maybe you should at least close it. What if something falls on Lukoil right now? No, we're sleeping now. Oh, right. So right on Lukoil then, the Russian Ministry of Defense reported that air defense allegedly shot down more than 220 drones overnight. Earlier, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, after Russia's massive strikes on Ukraine, stated that retaliatory strikes would not be long in coming. The Russians are now once again focusing their strikes on our energy infrastructure. Naturally, we have responses to this and we will continue to have them. Recently, Russians have often complained about attacks by strike drones and constant explosions in regions of the European part of the Russian Federation. A coalition of European leaders managed to convince US President Donald Trump that Russia is not interested in ending the war, and therefore it is necessary to put pressure on it to force it to come to the negotiating table, writes Politico. Now the parties are negotiating how exactly to do this. Last week, high-ranking European and American officials held a series of diplomatic contacts, during which they discussed plans to introduce new financial restrictions and halt Russian oil and gas exports. The European Union is now finalizing work on a new 19th package of sanctions against Russia. However, participants in the negotiations say privately that the most effective measures need to be taken in partnership with the United States. The Trump administration prefers trade tools such as tariffs on European authorities and sanctions against companies that cooperate with the Kremlin. Donald Trump has repeatedly warned that he may reconsider his approach to Russia if he sees that Moscow refuses to end the war against Ukraine. At the same time, the White House is increasing pressure on countries that help Moscow finance the war. In August, the US imposed 50% tariffs on Indian goods, partly due to the export of Russian oil, and Russia began offering the country cheaper oil. Meanwhile, Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski stated that the incursion of Russian drones into Poland was not a mistake. On the night when 19 Russian drones flew over Poland, more than 440 missiles flew over Ukraine. These were not mistakes. The head of Poland's Ministry of Foreign Affairs arrived in Kiev on September 12th. On the same day, Prince Harry arrived in the Ukrainian capital for a previously announced visit. The Guardian reports that Harry is visiting Kiev at the invitation of the Ukrainian government. He stated that he wants to do everything possible to help with the recovery of servicemen wounded in the war. A day earlier, the special representative of the US President General Keith Kellogg arrived in Ukraine. In Kiev, he met with the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. As the Ukrainian leader reported, they discussed various avenues of cooperation, how to achieve real peace and guarantee Ukraine's security.
Donald Trump is once again dissatisfied with Putin and promises tough measures. The American president assures that his patience with Vladimir Putin is running out quickly. He made the corresponding statement in an interview with Fox News. The reporter asked what tougher measures against Putin would look like. Trump replied, "It will be a strong blow of sanctions against banks, as well as measures related to oil and tariffs." At the same time, the US president assured that he had already done a lot to punish Russia, mentioning his tariffs against India, which in reality did not make that country give up Russian oil. At the same time, Japan has decided to lower the price cap on Russian oil from $60 to $47.50 per barrel, according to Reuters. Thus, the country will introduce additional sanctions regarding frozen assets and export controls on legal entities in Russia and other countries, in order to join international efforts to achieve peace in Ukraine. The European Commission, on Wednesday, September 17th, is preparing to introduce the 19th package of sanctions against Russia. It is noted that the new package of sanctions aims to increase pressure on Russia in response to the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The sanctions will target Russia's shadow fleet, the banking system, and impose additional restrictions on the sale of Russian oil. Russia's economy continues to slow sharply, writes Bloomberg. Growth in the first 7 months of 2025 was close to the lower end of the central bank's forecast of 1 to 2%. Economists warn that the results for the entire year may fall below this range.
Chechen dictator Ramzan Kadyrov, due to worsening health problems, has begun to constantly use a urine bag and has almost withdrawn from direct management of the republic. This was reported by Novaya Gazeta Europe, citing a source from the FSB administration in the Chechen Republic. According to the publication, in February 2025, there was another crisis after which he was fitted with a nephrostomy. Doctors recommend that such patients avoid physical exertion and sudden movements. In August, Kadyrov held only one meeting and only one appointment in his office. On July 25th, the media reported that at that time, Kadyrov nearly drowned at a resort in Turkey. Back in 2024, the publication Novaya Gazeta Europe reported that Kadyrov had been suffering for more than 5 years from a disease with a mortality rate of up to 80%, pancreatic necrosis. On May 6, 2025, Kadyrov stated that he had asked the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin to dismiss him from his position. Novaya Gazeta Europe wrote that in light of his illness, Kadyrov is preparing for a transfer of power in Chechnya and has appointed his underage son Adam as his successor. The YouTube channel Popular Politics analyzes the situation.
The FSB in Chechnya keeps a close watch on Kadyrov's unstable condition and closely monitors his health through their agents within his inner circle.
On September 1st, the Telegram channel VCHK-OGPU published a fragment of official footage showing the head of Chechnya, Ramzan Kadyrov, visiting an educational center, accompanied by the following commentary.
He couldn't walk at all. He couldn't even take a few steps. He could barely stand as well. He constantly needed assistance.
A little later, the Telegram channel published another video, a fragment of official footage showing Ramzan Kadyrov welcoming champion Khamzat Chimaev at the Grozny airport. In the footage, Kadyrov is seen moving for about 2 seconds. VCHK-OGPU notes that every step was extremely difficult for the head of Chechnya.
Germany wants to tighten the visa regime for Russians in the Schengen area. A document prepared by Berlin as part of the development of a new sanctions package contains a demand for the European Commission to fully implement the 2022 recommendations. They stipulate that visas for Russian tourists should be significantly reduced, writes the German tabloid Bild. Nevertheless, in 2024, Russian citizens were issued about 542,000 short-term visas for trips to European countries and other Schengen states, including Switzerland, which is about 20% more than in 2023. Tourists from Russia have flooded the resorts of France, Italy, and Greece. That is why European countries have decided to deprive Russians of their favorite vacations, writes the Italian press. In the Eastern EU countries, there has long been criticism about the unacceptability of wealthy Russians basking in the sun on Mediterranean beaches of EU countries, while countless people are dying in Ukraine as a result of Russia's war of aggression. Russians are not welcome in Turkey either. After Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Turkish hotels even introduced an option for guests to stay in hotels where there are no Russians. At the same time, Poland has suspended traffic through all border checkpoints with Belarus. 3 railway checkpoints for trucks have also been closed. The border closure took place against the backdrop of Russian drone attacks on Poland. However, according to Prime Minister Donald Tusk, the decision was made in connection with the start of the Russian-Belarusian military exercises Zapad 2025, which are scheduled to begin on September 12. He stated that the exercises are aggressive in nature and pose a threat to the country. Lithuania has also imposed restrictions on the use of part of its airspace ahead of the Zapad 2025 exercises. A nuclear signal to the West. Joint Russian-Belarusian military exercises Zapad 2025 have begun in Belarus. According to official reports, participants will practice repelling airstrikes, combating enemy sabotage groups, and the use of nuclear weapons. In particular, as previously stated by Belarusian Defense Minister Viktor Krenin, Russia and Belarus will practice the use of nuclear weapons and the Oreshnik during the exercises in September. In connection with the exercises, Poland has decided to close its land border with Belarus, according to Radio Svoboda. However, according to political analyst Ivan Preobrazhensky, no one actually intends to use nuclear weapons against European countries. In his opinion, there are serious doubts that there is any nuclear weapon on Belarusian territory at all, except for those on aircraft carriers.
In reality, these exercises will not practice the use of nuclear weapons, but rather the planning for such use. Most likely, we're talking about simple tabletop exercises where some paperwork will be shuffled around and commands will be given in a training mode without any real actions.
As is well known, the Kremlin has repeatedly resorted to nuclear bluffing. At the same time, tests of the weapons that Putin threatens with end in failure. Moscow tries hard to conceal them. For example, in September of last year, the much-publicized RS-28 Sarmat intercontinental ballistic missile exploded during a silo launch. Another high-profile failure for Russia was the explosion of the Burevestnik intercontinental missile during testing. The missile exploded in August 2019 in the Arkhangelsk region. At that time, 5 scientist testers and 2 Ministry of Defense employees were killed, and the radiation level in the area of the explosion was 16 times above normal. The launch of Putin's new pride, the so-called Oreshnik, on February 6, 2025 also ended in disaster for Russia. According to Forbes, the second missile of this type, which could have been aimed at Kyiv, exploded before even crossing the border. The publication notes that it is impossible to confirm the failed launch, but such an accident is not surprising. Ukrainian military political scientist Kirill Sazonov claims that the Oreshnik was unable to fly far and exploded in Russia.